Coming up on Chasing Natty, Week 2 is officially in the books, and man, did it remind me just how much I love college football. We got waiver wire pickups for you guys, and we're adding a new segment this week. We're going to include Mr. Nate Marchese's freakout scale, and we're going to get ahead on some of those players that you guys are definitely freaking out about, and we're going to tell you whether or not that is warranted or not. All this and more coming right after this.
Zappy looking to Jared Stearns, who makes the catch and scores.
What a burst! Trayvon Henderson, as advertised, touchdown Buckeyes!
This is Chasing the Natty, a college fantasy football podcast.
All right, welcome in everybody. This is Jared Palmgren, host of the Chasing Natty podcast. I hope you guys are having a wonderful ride to your work on this Monday morning. I am pleased to say that it is actually a gorgeous day here in Athens. Like the last couple times we've recorded this, we've done some weather talk, and I'm sitting here like, man, it looks disgusting out there. But today is gorgeous. Very, very nice day. Welcome back. Like I said, welcome back to another episode of Chasing Natty, guys. It is week 2 officially in the books. We're here to give you guys some waiver wire pickups, as well as talk about some of those players that you guys are definitely going to be wondering whether or not they're worth rostering at this point. And to help us out with that, I have my wonderful co-host, Mr. Nate Marchese, on with me today. Nate, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm fantastic, Jared. Another incredible college fantasy football weekend. I was up again late last night. There's some really good late night games.
There was.
So I was following along because, man, it was like a differential of like a point in my home league with the guy that I was up against. So I was trying to see, okay, please God, let Jaden Delora struggle a little bit here. So
But did you start Jaden Delora? Interesting.
He did. I did not. So I was up a point and late in the game with him. So I was happy to see him throw a few picks, and then they finally yanked him. So
I was in the Kings Classic League. I was playing up against Matt Hicks this week, and he started Jaquavius Marks, and he needed Marks to get like 30 points in order to catch me.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, Marks, he's not a 30-point kind of guy. And then like by the end of the first quarter, he was like at 10 points already. I'm like, okay, let's calm down here. We don't need, it was full PPR too. So like he could easily just keep catching balls. He didn't even need to, I don't know. I started freaking out, and then I went to bed, woke up, found out he got hurt in the game, kind of just left the rest of the game. I'm like, okay, I don't root for injury, but I'm kind of happy that one happened a little bit because it definitely kept him off my butt.
I think one of the best parts of college fantasy is staying up late to just those nail biter matchups, or waking up and checking your phone and be like, oh dear God.
Let's talk about this. Let's talk about this for a little bit here, because like this is why I think places like ESPN and all these massive media companies are missing out on something here. Because I remember it was John Lobb said in one of our chats the other day, where he said the Clemson Georgia Tech game, the only reason why he was even watching that game was because of Will Shipley. And, like, otherwise he would not even have bothered to watch that game. And I'm sitting here wondering, like, yeah, if college fantasy eventually blows up, so many of these games that don't get eyeballs are suddenly going to have a ton of people watching them because they're going to have some stake in the game. Again, I don't understand why. Again, I get it, but I don't get it.
It's the same with gambling as well. I mean, People stay up late to watch the Hawaii games because it's the last opportunity to try to make up for how crappy of a run you had earlier in the day with some of the bets that you placed. I think it would be really cool if we get to the point someday where ESPN or Fox or whatever network the game is on, that on the sidebars you can see, okay, this is win probability based off where you're at in the game. This is the exact stats of Jaden Delora and stuff like that, so that you can see, kind of track as you go. Okay, this is how your fantasy guy's doing. This is the chance that I'm actually going to pull out this and be able to cash this ticket. So yeah, there's definitely an untapped market there that I think they could dive into.
I definitely agree. Nate, we'll start off this show again, kind of like we usually do. We'll do a little bit of recap from this past week and everything. Let's talk about some of these bigger games this weekend. But I guess we could first do quick 30 seconds of our teams and everything. My Georgia Bulldogs, we faced Samford yesterday, won 33-0. Dare I say it was a boring game? It was just it felt like almost everybody there didn't really want to be there. They just kind of went through the motions, scored 33 points, didn't let them score a touchdown, and we kind of called it a day. It was a very lethargic day for the Bulldogs, I would say, overall. Not a very fun game to watch, even as a fan. But you had your Sooners had a very interesting outcome yesterday. I think it was, where were they up? 7-3 at halftime against Kent State?
Yeah, 7-3 half. They pretty much mirrored what went on with Georgia as far as it being kind of a boring. I mean, that's what I looked at my father-in-law who I was watching the game with, and I was just like, God, we just look boring right now. Like, this game is actually boring me. And you don't hear that, you don't feel that very often with the Jeff Lebby offense. But they hit Marvin Mims late and at the end of the first half. And then when they interviewed Venables, he was like, yeah, we're going to do more of that. That's what we need to do. And they did. And clearly he had a conversation with Lebby and Gabriel at halftime because, yeah, he was featured a lot more in the second half. So it was good to see Starvin Marvin get to eat a little bit.
Yeah, definitely loved that. I didn't love the fact that I was playing him in a P5 only league. It was a very close game up until that point, and all of a sudden Marvin just absolutely blows up by the end of the game. I'm like, well, there goes my chance of winning this game. Let's talk about some of the other bigger games. God, so many great upsets yesterday. Yesterday was peak college football. I gotta love it. But we can start with the biggest game of all yesterday, and that was Alabama at Texas. Nate, you and I are both fully expecting an absolute bloodbath here from Alabama. I said last week Georgia made a statement. This week Bama's going to make a statement against Texas, and that is straight up not what happened. So what's your reaction to the score of 20-19 Bama wins?
The biggest takeaway I had was how incredibly undisciplined Bama looked. Mm-hmm. So many penalties. It seemed like every other play that the 15. Defense was 15 penalties. Yeah, I mean, the offensive line was jumping early with false starts. The defense was late hits and face masks all over the place. I mean, they had a number of penalties, PIs and face masks that they didn't even get called for that they could have. So, yeah, it was just really strange to see how undisciplined they were.
And it wasn't even just the young players who were doing this and everything. Will Anderson had 3 penalties called on him yesterday, 2 offsides, and then just a gross late hit that he had from a guy that was clearly on the ground for a good while, and he just kind of shoved him back over as soon as he got up. I don't know if he was frustrated, just wasn't playing to his potential, but it was very, very weird. I agree 100%. I was texting my sister the whole time. She's a Bama fan. I was like, this doesn't look like how Bama normally looks in terms of just how disciplined they play.
Yeah, I feel sorry for, I think it's Louisiana Monroe is who Bama has this week, because Saban is just going to be ripping everybody a new one in practice all week. But I mean, obviously I'll give Texas some credit, but the 2 things that kind of stuck out to me outside of the undisciplined, play was Bama's offensive line is not as good as what we thought it would be. They're definitely struggling. And it's crazy that this defense, through 2 games against Texas and Utah State, has forced 0 turnovers and has 3 sacks in 2 games. I mean, this was supposed to be an epic, similar to what we saw from Georgia last year, that kind of defense. We saw that late in the year, and they're bringing all these freak show athletes like Turner and Anderson and all these guys back, and they're just not creating the kind of chaos we thought we'd get.
And it's not for lack of trying. I mean, last week we kind of had the excuse that Utah State was running a quick pass system. They're getting the ball out quickly. They're trying to just hit their playmakers and try to secure the ball as best they can. We didn't get that this week against Texas. There were several times where they let Ewers in the later card drop back for a good bit, let him sit in the pocket and try to hit a deep shot on it. They weren't just thrown out to the perimeter and everything. And in addition, watch Bama's play calls on defense. They were trying to dial up pressure several times. And it wasn't really until later in the game that they kind of got home with it. But that's also part of what was going on with Will Anderson. Again, jumped off sides twice early on in the game. So clearly they were trying to create some pressure. But again, due to either the undisciplined nature, just not executing well, it was just very off overall.
Yeah, I totally agree. It looked It did not look like them.
Did not look like Bama. And again, let's give Texas some credit here. Their defense looked much better yesterday than I was anticipating. Gary Patterson, I do think, might be one of the most underrated hires of the entire offseason. I think that was a great hire for them to make on the defensive staff. And I think this is going to pay dividends for them down the road, especially now that Quentin Ewers is out 4 to 6 weeks. Hudson Card will be the quarterback moving forward. I think we're going to see Texas get a little bit more conservative on offense, and they might have to rely on that defense just a little bit more. But considering that defense held Alabama to 20 points, and that's supposed to be one of the best offenses in the country this year, I don't think that there's any reason not to expect that moving forward.
Yeah, I'd like to see it more. I'd like to get a couple more weeks to really see what that defense is all about. But I mean, no doubt. I mean, it was a terrific hire to get him from TCU. I mean, he's got an incredible track record, incredible resume of coaching up, championship level defenses. So no doubt, great hire.
Yeah, and then the one other thing, I guess I didn't put him in the freak out scale, but we could talk about it real quick. Jermaine Burton and Trayshawn Holden yesterday. Abysmal performances, could not separate whatsoever. Are we worried about that a little bit, Nate?
Not yet.
Not yet?
Not yet. No, it's Alabama. I think they'll figure it out, and they have arguably the best quarterback in the country. So, yeah, I'm not freaking out yet. But man, that was not a great performance, and Texas even lost like halfway through the second quarter, lost one of their better defensive backs. So it's like, geez, how can you guys not put it together? But I think once the offensive line starts to play a little bit better, Bryce Young was on the move a little bit more than what he would prefer. He likes to, get out in space on his terms, not when he's being forced into space. And so I think once some of those get corrected, then we see, some of those numbers come up a little bit just once they get a little bit more time.
No, definitely makes sense. Let's move on to some of these other big upsets from yesterday.
Yeah.
Texas A&M going down to Appalachian State. App State does it again, baby.
God.
If you're Jimbo Fisher, and you are somebody who is throwing money at Jimbo Fisher right now, you gotta be sitting here thinking that you just wasted millions on this. This was supposed to be their year. This was supposed to be like they're bringing in this epic class. They got immediate contributors everywhere. They have been building something year after year. They were going to get to 10 wins. They were going to challenge Bama for the West. And then you go and lose to App freaking State week 2. There are some serious problems with this offense. And I don't know if it's a personnel thing. I don't know if it's a scheme thing. I'm leaning definitely more towards scheme. But man, that was a problem yesterday. So Nate, what was your reaction to that game?
186 total yards is what Texas A&M had against App State. I didn't look up to see what North Carolina got against App State, but I can promise you it was 2 to 3 times more than that.
I agree.
So yeah, it's the same story, different year with Texas A&M and Jimbo Fisher. He's got all this, all the talent that money can buy, wink, wink, but he doesn't have the quarterback in order to make it happen. I mean, Haynes King had 2 INTs against who did they play in?
Sam Houston.
Who did they play in week one? No, it was 2 INTs against Sam Houston in week 1. He had a few INTs before he got injured last year against Kent State. He did absolutely nothing against App State. Like, this is the best you can throw out there. This is your king, Haynes King. I mean, he's not very good, and yet Jimbo went with him, and they don't have anybody to unlock this offense with some pretty decent weapons as far as pass catchers between Stewart and Smith, and they're always consistent at tight end. Yeah. They're a mess. They're a mess on offense, and they're probably gonna beat somebody that they shouldn't, like they've done with Bama in the past, but they're gonna lose these games. So you're just like, man, what are we paying for again? It's crazy.
Yeah, so like I just looked up the offensive coordinator for Texas A&M because I couldn't remember it off the top of my head. It's Daryl Dickey. Yep. And this is like I think a lot of it comes down to the scheme, because like you see what Kirby Smart did at Georgia. He went out and got somebody from the outside. This is something that Dabo's refused to do. It looks like it's something that Jimbo's kind of really refusing to do. Yep. Is he went and got somebody from the outside, and he pretty much almost completely turned it over to them. Now, it took Georgia a few years with Todd Monken to get to a point where they felt comfortable with their starting quarterback. Somehow it was Stetson Bennett at the end of the day, but even still, I don't see that pattern going on for right now with A&M. In fact, it looks like it might be getting worse. I'm very concerned about like if they're going to be able to hold on to this class that they've got going on. Like I could see many different transfers out of Texas A&M by the end of this year if the program just does not look like it's in a good direction.
I think they paid. I was looking up with all these upsets. I'm always fascinated by how much these blue blood / P5 programs pay G5 teams to come in and beat them. And they paid $1.5 million for App State to come in and beat them, which is always hilarious to me because you have to hand them that check on their way out the door after they just embarrassed you in front of your home crowd.
Yeah,
we can use that as a transition into Nebraska if you want to, because
I'll be real, I completely forgot about them as well. But by Scott Frost.
Yeah, right. So Scott Frost is out today as we're recording. He got canned Sunday morning. It's amazing how badly they wanted Scott Frost out because his buyout is $15 million, and if they would have waited 19 more days, it's $7.5 million. And they're like, nope, still not worth it. We're willing to eat that extra $7.5 million to can him today. So basically, in the last 12 hours, they handed $2 million over to Georgia Southern to beat them.
Yep.
And then $15 million over to Scott Frost to not coach them anymore. So just amazing what kind of a dumpster fire that they are right now.
I've been told the most lopsided rivalry in sports is not between any two teams. It is between the academic office of college football coaches and their agents.
Yeah.
Because these buyouts are absolutely ridiculous that some of these coaches get. So
when I text my father-in-law, who's a Nebraska guy, that Frost was out, he said all he replied back was, "What a wealthy failure that was for him."
Exactly. Oh my God. You have to think that he was just trying to get fired before that date so that he could get that extra. Like he knew he was out the door regardless. So it's
there's no doubt. If I'm Scott Frost, I am partying tonight knowing that I just secured a bag of $7.5 million more than I thought I was going to get by the end of this year.
I try not to talk ill about coaches like that in terms of like, oh yeah, they totally just want to do that. Cause like there's coaches out there that are legit competitors. They don't care about that kind of stuff and everything like that.
Right.
But man, Scott Frost does not strike me as that kind of dude. But yeah, what an absolute embarrassment for Nebraska. 45-42 from Georgia Southern. Again, burn it all down, build it back up. Keep Mark Whipple. Think that was a good hire. I think you should keep him around. But again, go out and find yourself a good CEO coach that can turn that program around because, man, Scott Frost felt like more than anything an emotional hire. Last upset we'll talk about here today. Marshall goes to Notre Dame and takes down the Fighting Irish. I believe the final was 26-22 or 21. I can't remember off the top of my head. Regardless, pick six, seals it late. And is this partially that Marshall, I think, is just better than we're anticipating? I think they are probably one of the better group of 5 teams. But also I think there's definitely some Notre Dame has a lot of stuff to figure out with this new coaching staff. And I believe somebody pointed out this is the first time ever a Notre Dame coach has started off 0-3 as head coach for the Fighting Irish. So again, which way are we kind of feeling on that?
So I do think Charlie Huff is a really good coach. It's going to get a big time job at some point. He's Marshall's head coach. He's another Nick Saban disciple. So he's definitely in line for a nice promotion at some point. So we'll see him at the P5 level. But yeah, it's one of those deals with Notre Dame. When you have a coach that's never been a head coach, it looks great. The fan base loves him. Everybody's hyped up for it. He's recruiting well. You're happy to see the Brian Kelly move on to LSU. But then you're like, oh crap! But he's never coached a game. He's never had to face this level of adversity before. Yep. So 0-3 is not a good look. That's for sure. So we talked a little bit about Tyler Buckner last week and, how he performed against Ohio State. And it's clearly Tommy Rees has not been able to open that playbook very much with him on their quarterback. And it made me think all of and especially the quarterbacks of this class they're in their second year from coming in from high school. And it's such a volatile class. You just don't know what you're going to get, because 2020 was their senior year. They did not have one because of COVID. A lot of these players, Tyler Buckner did not play his senior year.
Evaluations couldn't happen.
He didn't play much his sophomore year because of a knee injury. And he didn't play much last year because he was the backup. So, I mean, you got a brand new quarterback that's literally played one season in the last 4. And it's like, you just don't know what you're going to get between that and a brand new coach.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I think you're absolutely right. And again, like I kind of threw out there as well, like these teams couldn't evaluate these players like they really wanted to. So much of it was based on what they knew before. They just had to assume that these players were going to continue to develop, whether they did or not. Some players fell behind. Some players are hidden diamonds in the rough. Like again, not to sound too homercian here and everything, but A.D. Mitchell was one of those players that I think had full evaluations have been done. He probably would have been upwards of a 4-star prospect rather than the 3-star that he was. Lad McConkey, another one. He was a 2-star prospect out of high school. All of a sudden now he's a starting wide receiver for Georgia. Probably would have been higher had they gotten full evals during that period. But on the flip side of it, there's a lot of players who we just kind of assumed were going to stay good, but then, like you kind of mentioned, Nate, they're kind of falling off a little bit because they missed out on a lot. So we'll see. All right, we'll move on. Next segment coming up is Mr. Nate Marchese's freakout scale. We'll get to that in just a second, but before we get too far, I haven't given you guys my spiel yet, so let's give the spiel here. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you like, subscribe, and comment right down there below. If you're listening to this on podcast, whether it be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever your favorite podcasts are going, you can make sure you follow us there and leave a 5-star review if they allow you to. In addition, we are part of the CFF team here at Campus Canton. It is myself, Nate Marchese, Brandon Sanders, and Chris Moxley. We got podcasts, articles, weekly CFF rankings for you guys. We have tools for you guys, all sorts of great stuff. So make sure to go check that out at Campus Canton. Check out our weekly lineup of different shows right now. Again, Mondays and Wednesdays, you got Chasing Natty with myself, as with Nate Marchese and Chris Moxley during the season. On Tuesdays, you got Campus Life with Austin Nace and Colin Decker as well, which is the college side of the Campus Canton podcast. And then on Thursdays or Fridays, you'll have the Canton Bound with Austin Nace and Colin Decker. That's the NFL side of the Campus Canton podcast. Wednesday nights, you got Devi Debate live streamed on YouTube with Felix Sharp, Matt Bruning, Austin Nace, and Chris Moxley. And then usually later in the week, you'll have the Bet on C2C podcast with Brandon Sanders, Chris K, and Ethan Sowers. They do a great job of giving you guys the best lines, the best prize picks, the best DFS plays of the week. So absolutely go check that out as well. And then on Saturday, Campus Canton's got 2 shows going on, 2 live shows. One in the morning, The Tailgate, that is with myself, Austin Nace, Colin Decker, Matt Bruning, and Chris Moxley. And then at night, you have College Fantasy Tonight, hosted by Felix Sharp, and you have a great recap of the day's events. So absolutely go check all of that out. Really appreciate you guys listening. Nate, let's go talk about your freakout scale here. If you want to explain to people what exactly the freakout scale is here.
Sure, yeah. So the last couple of years, I've sent out a tweet after week 1, basically asking, okay, send me a name of a player and I will let you know how much you should be freaking out about this guy and how much you should be overreacting or feeling good about, what we saw from the first week of the season. So scale of 1 to 10 here. 1 shouldn't be freaking out at all. Start with confidence. 3, kind of closely monitor. 5, look for a backup plan. Things aren't going well here. 7 is a guy that you definitely want on your bench and want no part of the starting lineup. And then up to 10, which is just straight up drop that fool. You don't want that guy on your roster anymore. He's taking up space, and move on to something else that'll be a little bit more profitable for you.
Yep, and again, we're going to try to get ahead. Nate, you're probably going to put out another tweet like that, I imagine, sometime this week. And we're going to get ahead on some of the players that we think are probably going to be mentioned over and over again. So we got 7 players here to talk about. A lot of wide receivers. Actually, out of the 7, we're going to talk about 5 of them are wide receivers because there's some real volatility with some of the wide receivers this year. So let's get straight into it. First one we're going to talk about here, Mr. Stephon Cobbs, wide receiver out of Boise State. In the 2 games so far, he has recorded 4 receptions for 39 yards. This was a guy that was going in the 4th to, at the latest, 6th round range of ADP during the offseason. And even in this last game, he recorded a big fat 0 despite the fact that he was playing most of the game. So Nate, scale of 1 to 10, what does the freak out scale say about Mr. Stephon Cobbs here?
I would put him probably at I would go as high as a 9.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Certainly considering dropping him. So he's somebody coming into the season that, I mean, obviously hindsight's 2020, but I didn't get one single share of him out of like the 10 best balls that I was in, because I just thought that the asking price was just too much. And man, that Tim Plow offense is so disappointing. They don't have an identity at Boise State as to what they are. And we all hope to kind of plug and play him into that lead wide receiver role there. But man, no, a goose egg in week 2. And the thing that worries me most is that his snap count saw a pretty steep decline. He went from playing, the most snaps out of the wide receivers to, I don't know, probably 3rd or 4th on that list this last week. So that's really concerning, to the point where there's got to be better options out there for you. You'd have to be in a pretty deep league in order to not let him go at this point.
I'm currently trying to look up. I posted that in the Slack. Here it is. So in week 1, he played 77 snaps.
Mm-hmm.
In week 2, he played 41. That is a massive drop off week to week, and that sent alarm bells ringing for me. And again, I like Stephon Cobbs. I've met him. I did the interview with him over the summer and everything. I really hope he turns it around here. But as of right now, there's no way I'm putting him in any of my starting lineups right now. And if he does have another terrible week here, there's no way I'm keeping him on my roster for the rest of the season.
Yeah, there's definitely a chance he bounces back, but I mean, we're gonna have to see something that we have not seen in the first 2 weeks of the season as far as what that offense is gonna look like, because they're kind of a mess right now.
Yeah. All right, next guy up here. This is a guy that you and I were both pretty high on during the season. Nate, Mr. Jeff Foreman, wide receiver out of Arkansas State. And he, so far this year, in the first 2 games, has recorded 1 reception for 5 yards. This was a man who, if I can pull up the ADP real quick, was going as a wide receiver 76. We had him ranked higher than that. All indications said that he was the dude throughout spring and a little bit into fall camp. This was going to be this was going to be his year, and here we are. 2 games in, 1 reception for 5 yards. Nate, where are we going at here? I imagine this is probably 10.
Yeah, God, this is so disappointing. This is somebody that I, unlike Cobbs, I did invest a lot in. I got a lot of shares of Jeff Foreman. Yeah, he's a 10. Drop that fool. The disappointing thing here is that Travellis Hunt hasn't been playing.
Yep.
And yet he still has mustered up 3 targets in 2 games. And this is an offense that throws the ball all over the field.
Mm-hmm.
And Champ Fleming's transferred in this year and has just stolen the show from him. And what's crazy is I had to check the snap count. I'm like, okay, maybe he's not getting any run. Nope. He's the second most. He's got the second most snaps of any of the wide receivers through 2 games. So he's out there. What's the quarterback again? The Florida State transfer.
James Blackman.
I want to call him Jeff Sims. James Blackman, which is fascinating, by the way. James Blackman actually carries more fantasy value today than Jeff Sims. Just kind of caveat there, but James Blackman targeted this guy like crazy in the spring game. He had like 180 yards and 3 touchdowns in the spring game. So I'm like, all right, here we go. It's time for Jeff Foreman to cook, and nope. It's not him. Drop him.
I agree. This is if he blows up later this season, just good process, bad results.
Yep.
Next one up here. This one is a guy I invested so heavily in this offseason. That is Zach Kuntz, the tight end out of Old Dominion. So far through 2 games, this is a guy that had over 100 targets last year, 2 receptions for 12 yards, and in this past weekend, a big fat goose egg. I talked to Justice, who is our IDP specialist here at C2C, as well as an Old Dominion fan himself, and I asked him, like, yo, what's going on here? And he said the offense has no identity and teams are doubling Zach Kuntz and he can't get past it. So, Nate, where are we on this one? What scale of 1 to 10? What's the freak out scale say about Mr. Zach Kuntz?
I'd put him at a 6.
Okay.
I'm certainly, if you have Zach Kuntz on your roster this year, you invested too much in order to drop him at this point. There's probably some better options that you could look at to start now. So he's kind of in that range of, okay, I'm really concerned to the point where I'm probably benching, but at the same time, he does, like you mentioned, he had 111 targets last year. So he's got potential to blow up any given week. I think the thing that concerns me most about him is he's got 11 targets this year through 2 games, which is fine for a tight end. It's a little bit below the pace where he was at last year, but only 2 catches and 12 yards. I went back and looked at his stats from last year, and yeah, he had 111 targets. He was incredibly inefficient. Mm-hmm. Even though he had all those targets, he only averaged 6.1 yards per target. And to put that into perspective, Brock Bowers, who obviously had an incredible year, 12.4 yards per target for Brock Bowers. He was twice as effective, twice as efficient as Zach Kuntz was last year. So my concern is that his value this year was baked in. Like, we had the idea that, okay, he's going to get this volume. So that's kind of baked into where we were drafting him. And he's just not being efficient with the volume that he gets.
Yeah, again, you said it yourself, 11 targets, but only 2 catches out of it. Again, there's the double team factor right there. He can't overcome it. And if that's going to continue, it doesn't matter how many balls come his way if he's not going to be able to catch it. So it's definitely frustrating for guys like me where, again, Kuntz often was the 4th tight end off the board, and I was very straightforward about the fact that, like, whoever's the last of the top 4 tight ends, if they're available to me, I will go and grab them, which made me get a lot of Kuntz and a lot of Michael Trigg this year. We'll talk about him in a second. But again, Michael Trigg, awesome week this week. But anyway,
yeah.
But again, you're right. This was a tight end 4 in ADP this year. This was a guy that was going near the end of the 5th round. Like, again, it's hard to want to drop him. I'm with you. I'm fully on bench him right now. If you have another option on your roster, I'd say probably start him one more week if you really just don't have any better options for your team.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
All right, moving on to the next guy here. Quentin Johnston, wide receiver out of TCU. This was a man who was going as the wide receiver 12 this year in ADP. He was a mid to late 3rd rounder for the most part. And we thought he was going to blow up this year with the Sonny Dykes offense. They made it clear that they were going to want to use him. No evidence of that so far this year, though. 5 receptions for 44 yards, 0 touchdowns. And this is not coming against this is not coming against good competition. This is coming up against Colorado and somewhere called Tarleton State. So it's
the juggernaut that is Tarleton State.
The juggernaut that is Tarleton State. Nate, 1 to 10, like, what are we doing here with Quentin Johnston? This is bad.
Yeah, we could have this same conversation every year with Quentin Johnston, I feel like. Man, he is an enigma for sure. I kind of got him in that same range that I had Kuntz. I'm probably in that 5 to 6 range. This is my wide receiver 2 coming into the season. So I'm not giving up on him yet. I thought that Dykes would be a great hire, obviously from the system they had before. I thought that having the QB change week 1 would have been great. That didn't work out. And then Dykes comes out and says, okay, our plan now is to get Quentin Johnston more opportunity. Week 2 comes around. They got a new QB again. Still not more opportunity. So it's certainly frustrating. The thing you run into with Quentin Johnston is I guarantee you as soon as you bench him, he will go for like 40. 150 and 3 touchdowns because that's what Quentin Johnston does. You either have to get rid of him altogether, either trade him or do something to get him off your hands, or you have to start him every damn week because you can't do the yo-yo thing with him, and you will be on the losing end. It's impossible to guess when he's going to blow up. So have a backup plan, trade him, see if there's any value left. But if you bench him, you're going to regret it.
Yeah, pretty much. He's the wide receiver version of Adrian Martinez, where it's like every time I started Adrian Martinez, he would get me like 10 points.
Yes.
And the week that I would bench him, that would be the one he'd go off for like 35, 40 fantasy points.
Perfect analogy. And it also isn't, the competition level makes no difference. Yeah. He'll do it against Baylor, or he'll do it against Oklahoma.
Yep.
And then he'll suck against Kansas or something. Like, you just never know.
Exactly. It is truly an enigma. So again, I agree with you. 5-6 range feels pretty good for him. Not dropping him yet, but man, it's tough to believe in him moving forward if he can't do it against that kind of competition. Another wide receiver here, Kayshon Boutte, wide receiver out of LSU, through 2 games. 7 receptions, 62 yards. This man was going as the wide receiver. Where are you? Wide receiver 9 this offseason in CFF ADP. A lot of investment put into this guy. At one point, a lot of people considered him a pretty good deal in the 3rd round, because when the season first started, he was going in like the 1st round. Then the rumors started coming that he might not play. Now he is playing, but man, it ain't looking good. So, Nate, where are we with Kayshon Boutte, scale of 1 to 10?
I've got him in a 7. He's got to be on your bench. We talked about all the red flags surrounding him before this season, and warned people, hey, if you invest in Boutte, it may not go well for you. And we're starting to see some of that. That there's clearly a effort issue. There's issues with the coaching. There's not a great quarterback situation. So, I mean, eventually they're going to be playing better competition in the SEC. They're going to have to throw the ball around more, but man, it would not shock me if mid-October we're talking about him having a small injury and we don't see any more of Boutte before, as the season goes on. So I'm definitely benching. Right. Yeah. Wink, wink. He's done for the year.
Yeah, no, I'm very much interested, or not interested in. I don't think I have a single share of Boutte this year. I don't think I invested in him once. Maybe one best ball if he fell to like the 4th or 5th round, I might have taken the shot on it. But like, I'm very much glad I am off this train.
Right.
So let's move on to. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and I don't know that if there is a QB, I thought maybe if Nussmeier comes in, that'll fix it, and he'll have a better passing quarterback. Boy, Nussmeier looked rough yesterday. Two picks in their game versus, I don't remember who they were playing, some scrub team.
They were playing, I think, just Southeastern University.
Yeah, boy.
Yeah, those guys.
Okay.
Alrighty. Let's talk about our last wide receiver here. This one I feel like is going to end up on the lower range of the freakout scale, but I thought people are probably going to bring him up because of the Quinn Ewers injury, as well as the fact that, again, he hasn't gotten a touchdown yet, but Xavier Worthy, wide receiver to Texas, 7 receptions, 121 yards, no touchdowns, and he was the wide receiver 3 for ADP this offseason. Definitely not the way you wanted to start off this season. You definitely would have hoped he would have had a blow-up game at least in one of these 2 weeks right here. Again, honestly, he probably had a better week last week against Bama than he did against UL Monroe the week before. Yeah. But Nate, where are we with Xavier Worthy?
I'm not real concerned here. I would put him probably at a 2. Okay. I'm starting to kind of monitor the situation. Yeah, obviously Hudson Card is not as good of a passer as Quinn Ewers. We saw that yesterday for sure. Mm-hmm. But who else is he going to throw the ball to? Casey Kane? I mean, he's still going to get a ton of targets. They still have to play offenses like Oklahoma State, West Virginia, TCU, Texas Tech. I mean, they're going to have to. Even if Ewers is out for quite a while, they're still going to have to throw the ball. So, man, he dropped a touchdown pass. Otherwise, we're probably not having this conversation. Everybody's probably fine with 12, 13 points against Alabama, but he's got to step it up. He can't. He's had a drop issue, and that's a problem. So.
Yeah, and I'm not worried about the QB conversation with this and everything. Like, again, he had Casey Thompson and Hudson Card thrown to him last year. He was still very productive in several different games. No problem with Hudson Card kind of moving forward. Like you said, who else is he going to throw to you? Worthy's the best offensive player they have outside, not named Bijan Robinson. So he's going to get involved in the offense moving forward. I'm not worried about this whatsoever. Last player we're going to talk about here, we're going to move on to our only running back here, but I saw several people talking about this in the Discords, some people talking about it on Twitter. So let's talk about it here. Kamar Wheaton, running back out of SMU. So far this season, he has had 6 total rushes for 41 yards, so he's been efficient, but very limited touches. And during the offseason, he was going as the RB24. So Nate, scale of 1 to 10, what's the freak out scale say about Kamar Wheaton right now? Because this is definitely not a great start for somebody that had a ton of upside.
Right. I probably have him, I would say maybe a 9. And we're talking obviously redraft here. The really weird thing is that all those yards that he had, the 6 for 41 or whatever, that was week 1. I was looking at the stat line. He did not play at all week 2. And surprisingly, Trey Siggers did not play either. It was just, and I tried to research, no word whatsoever what happened to Trey Siggers. I guess he got dinged up in week 1. Maybe Kamar re-aggravated the knee issue he's been having. So, and that set him back. But obviously it's concerning that he got 0 carries in week 2. So yeah, I mean, if you're in a redraft league, we're getting pretty close to the point where you can just go ahead and drop him. I still think there's a chance he ends up being the RB1 there at some point this season, but there's too many fish in the sea to sit around and wait for him and him clog up your roster.
I agree. Like, we're going to get into some of these waiver wires guys here in a minute, but there's plenty of guys you can go out there, grab, have much better production week in and week out than waiting for the upside that might come with Wheaton, because we don't even know if Wheaton gets that kind of volume, if he'll be as productive as we want him to be. So yeah, we'll definitely see. Let's go ahead and get into some of these waiver wires. We got 4 quarterbacks, 5 running backs, 5 wide receivers, and 3 tight ends to talk about today. So we're going to get through these as quickly as we can, but pretty much almost a full slate of waiver wire pickups for you guys today. Nate did a great job this morning helping, or both of us kind of going around and trying to find some of these guys, and some good value out there right now. So let's talk about it here. First quarterback we're going to talk about, Kyle Van Treese, quarterback out of Georgia Southern. I and Chris Moxley mentioned earlier in the offseason that Georgia Southern was a very sneaky offense to kind of invest into this offseason, because pretty much every piece was for free. Jalen White, the running back, Kyle Van Treese here, the quarterback at Georgia Southern, Derwin Burgess and Jeremy Singleton, both top wide receiver options. Now Caleb Hood as well looks like a good receiving option for them. They are passing the ball a ton down in Statesboro, Georgia. Week 1, Van Treese threw 46 times and scored 4 touchdowns. And then week 2 against Nebraska, he didn't get the touchdowns. He only got 1 touchdown through the air. He got a rushing touchdown as well, but he's not really much of a dual threat. But he threw 56 times in the game against Nebraska. Now, granted, it was a shootout, but even still, they're not afraid to throw the ball a ton in this offense. This staff comes from the same tree that bloomed the Western Kentucky Kitley system. This is a system I think we need to invest more into going into the season. If you're struggling at quarterback, I see no reason why not to go grab a guy with a ton of volume like Kyle Van Treese here. Nate, what's your thoughts on Mr. Van Treese?
Yeah, I think he's a pretty good waiver pickup. I'll fully admit I was a little slow to hop on this Georgia Southern train, and boy, they have put up some monster passing numbers through a couple of weeks, like you mentioned. And here's kind of the beauty of their situation too. Nebraska was that tough non-conference game, and they just put up 45 on them in Lincoln. Their only other non-conference competition is UAB and Ball State, and then they hop into the Sun Belt. And so it's like, okay, there's really not a whole lot that's going to slow them down. It was the same conversation we had about Todd Centeio last week with James Madison. I mean, the schedule sets up really nice for them to continue to chuck it around the field and not have a whole lot of pushback from the defense. So yeah, I think wheels are definitely way up for him.
Yeah. And again, like, this is probably not somebody that I would pick up and expect to be your guy moving forward, but I think he has that upside certainly. Mm-hmm. All right, let's talk about a more interesting one here. Max Duggan, quarterback out of TCU. We debated putting this one on because we didn't know if he was like available in enough leagues, but even still, like with everybody moving more towards Chandler Morris right before the season started, I imagine enough people dropped Duggan here. But he is now the starting quarterback out of TCU with Chandler Morris just banged up and injured. Is this totally just a system play here, Nate? Do we just expect him to thrive under the Sonny Dykes system? Or is there something a little more to this?
There's definitely a chance of fool's gold here with him coming in for injured Chandler Morrison. I don't know. He put up what, like 350 and 5? Sorry, I didn't have the stats right in front of me, but I'm pretty sure it was right around that.
In the Colorado game, he threw 3 times for 27 yards, but then in Tarleton State, he threw 29 times for 390 yards and 5 touchdowns. Yes.
390 and 5. Yeah. So I mean, obviously there's a chance of fool's gold here. You don't get to play Tarleton State all the time. So I was kind of thinking about this, and this situation reminded me a lot. Potentially best case scenario for Duggan here is what happened with Hendon Hooker last year.
Okay.
And that the new staff comes in, takes a look at 2 quarterbacks, one that has proven to be really productive, but not great at times, and decides to go with the other guy because they think they've got more upside. And then week 1 is a total disaster. I mean, Chandler Morris looked awful against Colorado. And then all of a sudden the backup comes in and looks great. And maybe he kind of Wally Pips Chandler Morris and runs with this job. I wouldn't wait, I wouldn't blow a whole bunch of my waiver budget on Max Duggan, but if he wins this job and runs with it for the season and starts looking pretty good, I mean, they have a bye week next week, so you have to wait a little bit. But if he gets it going, we are still talking about a system that has produced top 10 fantasy quarterbacks year in, year out under Sonny Dykes. So there is a high upside with a really low floor potential here in this pickup.
Yeah, and add in the fact that Duggan is known to run the ball as well. I think there definitely is a ton of upside with this pick, but I agree with you 100%, Nate. Don't throw a ton of your resources towards this one. If you have a really good quarterback room, no reason to rush out and grab Duggan for any kind of potential upside here. This is the one I'm a little bit more cautious on, but all the system and everything points his way. He's got the experience as a starting quarterback. I think can definitely help you guys out a little bit.
You know what's fun about when TCU does come back week 4? Do you know who they play?
Who do they play?
SMU. Sonny Dykes going up against his old his old team across town. So that'll be
the iron skillet. Let's go.
So there's if Duggan does start, I mean, there's big time potential there because SMU is not really great at defense, and he's going to want to stick it to him because he's got a lot of fans.
Dude, that really entire game could be just an absolute shootout because they're just going to be throwing everything they got at each other.
Yeah, no doubt.
Alrighty. Moving over to another Big 12 school here. I threw this on here. I wasn't sure if he would technically be low enough rostered for us to really talk about him here, but I just kind of made a guess and said he is. But we're going to talk about JT Daniels here, quarterback out of West Virginia. This is a guy that was going very late in drafts, if not undrafted in a lot of different leagues. A lot of people were kind of off of him because they were afraid the moment that he got hit, he was going to shatter like your mom's favorite vase, and that he would just be out really early on in the season. Didn't want to invest too much into it. But here we are 2 games later, 40 passing attempts in both of his games, hit over 350 yards in the game against Kansas, multiple touchdowns in both games, clearly going to throw the ball a ton, clearly going to be in some shootouts, because good God, if you get in a shootout with Kansas, you're going to get in a shootout with pretty much anybody. So he's going to have to score. I think JT Daniels, if he is available in your league, 100% worth picking up and is a very safe option at quarterback week in and week out, in my opinion. What do you think, Nate?
Yeah, JT Daniels should be owned in every format. If he's somehow available in your league, you need to scoop him up. West Virginia, I mean, it's a Graham Harrell quarterback. West Virginia is going to give up a ton of points. This is the perfect scenario.
Yep. Not too much really else to say there.
Yep.
Let's talk about the last quarterback here. Quentin Ewers goes down. Might as well talk about the guy who's going to replace him. That's Hudson Card, quarterback out of Texas. And I am not the biggest believer in Hudson Card, but it is a Steve Sarkisian offense at the end of the day. This is a offense that runs very efficiently. It is going to require the quarterback to make some plays, make some throws down the field. And if Hudson Card, like reports say, was the guy that Steve Sarkisian wanted to move forward with to start the season, there could be some potential upside here in terms of how well Hudson Card knows the system and how well he's able to execute it. So I say a cautious pick him up, throw him on your bench, see how he does over the next couple of weeks. Nate, what are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I agree. And he's not great. He's serviceable. You may just be looking at 4 to 6 weeks probably, and then he loses his job back to Quinn Ewers. He's going to have to really look good in order to take that job from Quinn Ewers. But similar to Duggan, it's a nice offense. He's got Xavier Worthy and Bijan there to throw the ball to. So there's potential for him to be worth an ad here, but he's definitely not in that same category as JT Daniels or Van Treese, So cautiously, maybe make a play for him if you're really dire at quarterback.
Yeah, again, some upside there, but I'm not super sold on it.
Right.
Quick honorable mention for quarterbacks here. I'm going to throw out N'Kosi Perry, quarterback at a Florida Atlantic. 2 30-ish point games this past week in terms of if you have 4-point passing touchdowns. I am hesitant to say that is something I expect out of him the rest of the season. I think it was very matchup based, but again, they play in the FAU is CUSA, right?
Yeah.
So they play in CUSA. Gonna have plenty of good matchups. He could be somebody you're kind of keeping an eye on and seeing if he can produce week in and week out. Only thing that kind of held me back is the week 1 performance. He only threw 20 times. It was just very, very good in terms of his average. So let's go on to running backs here. First one up here, LaDavian Webb, running back out of South Alabama. Talk about consistency right here. In both weeks, he has had 18-plus attempts, 90-plus yards, 2 touchdowns in both weeks, 2 receptions in both weeks, and no receiving touchdowns there. But again, consistent against 2 different opponents, Nichols and Central Michigan. So even in a step up in competition, he still performed pretty well. This schedule sets up really, really nicely for LaDavian Webb down the line. They play UCLA this upcoming week. I probably wouldn't start him in that one, but even then, UCLA gave up points to Bowling Green. So I probably would consider that as well. But then, like Nate said, they play in the Sun Belt. None of these defenses scare me. Louisiana Tech, Louisiana, UL Monroe, Troy, Arkansas State, Georgia Southern, Texas State, Southern Miss, Old Dominion. Where is the non-start in that lineup? I don't see one. And if you're going to give me a guy that gets 18 to 20 carries week in and week out and maybe earns more as the season goes along, I'm fully bought into LaDavian Webb there at South Alabama. Nate, what are you thinking here?
Yeah, I hope this is a guy that people picked up after last week. We mentioned him as one of our honorable mentions. So, And he followed that up with another great performance. He was somebody that I really wanted to invest in prior to the season, but I got scared because there was a foot injury in fall camp and he was really limited. And I was like, gosh, I don't want to risk it there. But man, it is clear that this staff thinks he's head and shoulders above the next closest running back. So yeah, he's got a chance to have a really, really nice season. I think 1,000 yards and 10 TDs is well within his range and probably his floor.
Yeah, you just want guys that monopolize the backfield like this, and Webb is certainly separated from everybody else on that offense right now, so fully bought into him. Let's talk about our next one here. Henry Parrish, running back out of Miami. I have to eat a little bit of crow here. I was fully convinced that Parrish's week 1 performance, where he had 14 carries, 108 yards, 3 touchdowns, that was fully because Jalen Knighton was not playing, and that no way that he was going to be that top running back option throughout the whole season. It's going to be too split, not going to be able to start on week to week. Then he follows it up last week with Jalen Knighton playing with even more carries, 23 carries last week for 109 yards and a touchdown, as well as 3 receptions through the air. I'm eating a little bit of crow on here because, again, if there is a Miami running back that can separate themselves, which it looks like that Parrish is doing at the moment, I think it's absolutely worth picking up and just stashing on your roster to monitor over the next couple of weeks. Nate, what do you think about Parrish here?
I think this week's game is going to tell us a lot because they go and play Texas A&M. I'm not sure where that game is, but they have Texas A&M this week. So the staff's going to run with the guy that they think gives them the best chance to win that game. So that'll be interesting to see how it plays out. We could have just as easily discussed Rooster Knighton on the freakout scale. You know, a lot of people invested in him and kind of that round, 8 to 12 range before the season started. So, this is a good example of when a new staff comes in, you sometimes don't know what you're going to get with a room. Knighton was pretty good fantasy wise last year in taking over that backfield due to injuries, but that doesn't mean this new staff likes him that much. And they brought Henry Parrish, the running backs coach is from Ole Miss, and he brought Parrish with him. And so they clearly like this guy quite a bit. Surprisingly enough, I would not have guessed this 3 weeks ago, but he's definitely worth an ad at this point.
Yeah. Again, I was a little hesitant at first, but again, just the fact that Knighton came back and he added more volume than he did the week before tells me that he's earning more carries, whether it be in practice or in the game. Definitely somebody that, if he's available, I'm going to grab him, hold him on my roster, and definitely worth more than some of the running backs I invested in at the end of a lot of my drafts.
No doubt.
Let's talk about this next one. Nate, I'll let you take over this one because I've been very mean to you and not let you speak first on some of these guys today. So we'll talk about Taj Brooks here, running back out of Texas Tech. Nate, what do we love so much about Taj Brooks and what we're bringing from him from Texas Tech?
I really like Taj Brooks' game, man. I thought he was great last year. I thought that it made no sense to me that he was basically 50-50 with Roderick Thompson. I thought he was clearly the better player. And it looks like Kitley and the new staff over there at Texas Tech saw some of the same things that I was seeing. I think he had 23 touches yesterday as compared to 9 for Thompson. And obviously the game script, pass rate, that the neutral game script passing that Kitley has is always going to be very high in favor of passing the ball. But they are around the goal line a lot. There is scoring opportunities, and we're seeing that. This guy's, he has been a touchdown machine through the first couple of weeks of the season here. So it's probably not something you can bank on every week, but I do think that there is some value in him, and that he can certainly, you can pick your spots with him, and I think he can be pretty productive.
Well, it's kind of like how you mentioned with Parrish just a second ago. There are certain games along each team's schedule that truly show you who are their go-to guys. Who, right, when the going gets tough, who are they going to? I don't know if you watched this Texas Tech Houston game last week. It was a tough game for Texas Tech. It was a back-and-forth affair. A lot of great plays being made all the time. Go watch it if you haven't already. But here we are. Like you said, Brooks got 23 touches in that game compared to Thompson, who only had 9, and that is a step up from what they gave him against Murray State the week before. I think Brooks is earning more touches as the weeks go on, and the fact that he can also catch out of the backfield, I think, is huge because it allows them to keep throwing the ball as much as they want, but now they have an additional receiver out there, or receiving option out there they can rely on out of the backfield. I'm very, very bullish on Taj Brooks moving forward, so I think it's a great call here, Nate.
Totally agree.
All right, this next one's interesting. I pray to God the start of his era at Penn State has begun. But we're going to talk about running back Nicholas Singleton out of Penn State. This past week, had 10 carries for 179 yards and 2 touchdowns. Just absolute monster performance from him. The volume isn't there yet, but he was by far the best running back that Penn State was throwing out there yesterday against a very inferior opponent. Katron Allen looked good as well, but he did not have nearly the performance that Singleton did. Nate, what do we think about Singleton moving forward here? Is he somebody to pick up and just expect him to earn more carries as the weeks kind of go on? Or are we jumping the gun a little bit here after a really, really good performance?
He doesn't get to face Ohio every week. Clearly, he's
Yes.
he's going to be up against Big Ten competition here before too long. But this is exactly what you want to see when you have a blue chip 5-star stud freshman running back. You want to see that early season pop where he just forces the coach's hand and says, "Hey, I'm by far the man in this room, and make me your workhorse." And that's exactly what happened this past Saturday. Props to John Lobb for investing so much into. I mean, we were like, "Gosh, man, John's really taking Nick Singleton early in a lot of these drafts." But dude, it might actually pay off for him big time because clearly the talent is there. You just want that opportunity, and he's forcing the coach's hand right now. If that offensive line can keep it together, I think there's a chance that they really rely on him as the focal point of their offense.
I invested heavily in Singleton in dynasty drafts this offseason. Yeah. I took him as the first freshman in two of my drafts, so I have him on 2 of my dynasty rosters. And I'm not gonna lie, as the season approached, I was not regretting it because I still expected him to be a stud at some point. But I was like, man, I could have gone like a guy like Luther Burden, who was going to play immediately, be the focal point immediately instead of Singleton. But after Burden's, I'd say, relatively lackluster performance last week, and Singleton just popping against very terrible competition early, I'm a bit more hopeful now that my investment in Singleton is going to pay off really, really early here. Like you said, we were kind of hoping that he might have that Travion moment really early on here where he just makes big plays, clearly shows he's better than everybody else. I think we got it yesterday. I really, really hope it is now the Singleton era for the next 3 years at Penn State.
It has to be. Let him loose, Franklin. Don't keep him balled up.
Who does Penn State play next? I need to look up their schedule. Penn State plays. Trying to keep us going here. Let's see. They play Auburn next. If there is a game for him to make a statement in and perform well against, that is it right there. Then they play Central Michigan and Northwestern. They got a couple. They got a couple good matchups there. I think he could definitely make some statements in.
No doubt.
All right. Last but not least here, I know it's a crime to mention the fact that a Georgia player could be a fantasy option here, but we can't ignore what Kenny McIntosh is doing at Georgia right now. I've been a big Kendall Milton fan this entire offseason. I still am. I still think he is the best between the tackles runner that Georgia has, and we'll definitely see that as the season kind of goes along here. But we aren't here for Kenny McIntosh's ability to run between the tackles. We're here because he is the leading receiver for Georgia this year. And in both of his games, or the first game, 9 catches for 117 yards. And in the second game, 5 catches for 61, scored a touchdown on the ground in both of them. So they're clearly not afraid to use them around the goal line because of his speed. In a PPR format, I think Kenny McIntosh is a must grab right now. Because if you're going to get that volume of catching out of a running back from a team that historically has not passed a ton, is passing more this year. But again, this is kind of an anomaly.
Right.
What do you think, Nate?
Yeah, I mean, you and I have certainly debated over, between McIntosh and Milton over the last few months on the Slack threads, but you have to add him at this point. He clearly has assumed this James Cook role, except for I think the difference is that he's
20 pounds bigger.
That's what I was going to say. He's maybe even better running the ball, between tackles than James Cook. And we haven't seen Milton prove that he's capable of taking on the load that Zeus White had. You know what I mean? So, and we're one hamstring pull from Kendall Milton away from this guy assuming the lead back role with that receiving ability, which is a really fun idea because Monken has proven during his time at Oklahoma State that he can really feature a running back, and especially one that catches the ball well out of the backfield. So we saw that with Randall over at Oklahoma State years ago, and boy, he put up monster years. So yeah, absolutely. I think that there's, you're right now, you're probably not looking at many 25-point ceiling weeks, but I think he's going to consistently get you in that 12 to 17 range where he's a very viable option week to week.
Yeah, and again, just go back and watch the film from Kenny McIntosh the last couple of weeks. Monken has been an absolute genius in the way that he has been utilizing Kenny McIntosh as a receiving threat. Every pass that has gone McIntosh's way, for the most part, McIntosh is wide open. Like, he is schemed well away from all the defenders. Just, again, I fully expect Georgia to keep doing this, and that McIntosh absolutely, especially in a PPR format, going to be an option for you guys moving forward. So, that's the last of our running backs. Couple of quick honorable mentions here. Nate and I were pushing the faith on the UNC backfield, but Omarion Hampton looking pretty good at UNC. Again, it was looking a little rough this past week, but then he broke off another big one. And I believe DJ Jones is injured as well now. George Pettaway did not get a ton of run in that game either. It looks like things are just kind of working out for Hampton to be the main back moving forward regardless.
Yeah, did Jones get hurt yesterday?
I think I could have sworn I heard something about him getting banged up.
Okay. Yeah, boy, gosh, that backfield, all that's going to be left of the two freshmen.
Exactly.
Hood's out. Brooks gets done for the year. Yeah, so, man, yeah, I'm with you. I want somebody to separate there at UNC. Clearly, it's a high octane offense, but they just keep. So far, they've been spreading it around. Couple touchdowns. Yeah, a couple touchdowns yesterday. Certainly make Hampton look like the one to own there.
Absolutely. And then the other honorable mention we're going to throw out here: if Tay McWilliams is out for an extended period of time at Baylor, Quallen Jones, running back there at Baylor, is going to be a very interesting option. Definitely be on the lookout for any kind of injury news regarding Tay McWilliams this week. If he is out for an extended period of time, I could see Quallen Jones taking over that main back role there at Baylor, and that has been a very productive system for running backs in the past for CFF, so absolutely keep an eye out for that. Let's go to the wide receivers here. We won't spend too long on this first one because we kind of talked about him earlier a little bit, but Champ Fleming's the wide receiver out of Arkansas State. Past 2 weeks, 7 receptions for 122 yards and a touchdown against Grambling, and then last week against Ohio State, 10 receptions, 105 yards, no touchdowns because Ohio State was not sharing their end zone very well. But regardless, that's a volume you want to see in a high-passing offense. Clearly the number one guy here at Arkansas State, Champ Flemings. Is there really anything else for you to say here, Nate? Because wide receiver 1 at Arkansas State in that system, somebody you want to own. Yeah,
it's fascinating that Blackman has zeroed in on his slot receiver and not one of the outside guys to be his wide receiver 1. The fun fact with Champ Fleming is here, he's got 17 catches through 2 games. He's been targeted 17 times. He's caught every single ball that's been thrown his way.
Gotta love it.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're James Blackman, you're going to continue to feed that guy. He 100% catch rate. So keep going to him. So, yeah, I mean, this is a big time waiver move for sure.
I agree. Let's talk about a guy that we could have talked about last week, but I kind of want to see one more week just to make sure it wasn't a fluke. Not a great performance this past week against Idaho. Only caught 4 balls for 43 yards. But as we'll mention here, he still had the passing volume come his way. This is Cam Camper, wide receiver out of Indiana. I don't think any of us were really talking about Indiana as a CFF system really before the season got started. But Connor Bazelak comes in at quarterback. He's looking pretty good over there at Indiana. They can't run the ball worth a damn. And now that kind of forces them to pass. And Cam Camper has been the guy that kind of really stepped up over there. The week before last against Illinois, he had 11 catches, 156 yards. No touchdowns yet. But you have to believe with a guy that has this much volume, those are going to come. So Nate, any thoughts really on Cam Camper here out of Indiana?
The number one thing you look at when it comes to fantasy wide receivers is opportunity and volume, and targets are the best measure of that. He had 17 targets in week 1, even though he just had 4 catches in week 2. He had 11 more targets, which was 8 more than the next closest wide receiver there at Indiana. So clearly he is the favorite target option for Bazelak, and the scoring opportunities will come in time. There's no doubt. If you continue to get 14 targets per game, you will score touchdowns. It's coming.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm looking at Indiana's schedule. There's some good matchups in terms of just the amount of points they'll score, but even still, when it comes to wide receivers, the game script's going to favor them even if they're in a relatively bad matchup because Indiana's going to have to throw the ball. Now, granted, they might have to throw the ball every time because Sean Shivers isn't doing anything, but regardless, like I think there's very few weeks kind of looking forward here that you aren't wanting to start Cam Camper. Michigan on October 8th might be a bad one. Ohio State on November 12th, but even against Penn State and Michigan State, if he's going to get that level of volume, I feel pretty good about that.
Totally agree. Yeah.
All right, next one here, Caleb Ducking. Nate, you and I are CFF systems guys. This felt like one that we should have been all over because Caleb Ducking plays the Z role at Mississippi State, and yet I was pretty hesitant to believe that he would be the guy at Mississippi State this year because Jaden Walley was still there. I was a big believer in Austin Williams. Austin Williams had a pretty good day as well yesterday, but it is Ducking who is getting the targets, and he is increasing his role week after week. Week 1, 3 receptions, 73 yards, and a touchdown. Yesterday against Arizona, 7 receptions, 58 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So clearly a guy that Will Rogers is getting very comfortable with very quickly. What do you think about Ducking here at Mississippi State?
They spread the ball around a lot there at Mississippi State, but like you mentioned, that Z receiver position is just so valuable for fantasy. It's what Malachi Polk played last year. It is what a lot of the high volume receivers at Washington State played when Leach was there. So even though it's a fifth-year senior that we know very little about and has proven nothing during his time at Mississippi State, you still have to just acknowledge the fact that he's in that primary spot. So yeah, I think that this is last night was a good indicator of kind of what you're going to get throughout the season. He may not be a guy that gets you 150 yards, but he's going to be targeted the most and has a really, really good opportunity there.
Yeah, again, like I said, I was hesitant to believe he would be the guy that kind of breaks out here, but he's producing like a Z at Mississippi State should. So at 2 games in, I have no reason to believe that that's going to change anytime soon. Now, Leach is known for kind of shifting favored wide receivers as the season kind of goes along, so absolutely be on the lookout for that. See if anybody else kind of steps up there. But we'll definitely see. As for now, somebody to pick up if he's available in your league. All right, next wide receiver here. Antwain Wells Jr., wide receiver out of South Carolina, the leading receiver from James Madison last year, just an absolutely monster season with them. He transferred over to the very popular transfer destination that was the South Carolina Gamecocks. So far this season, first game, 7 receptions, 55 yards, no touchdowns. Still, great volume there. And he followed it up the next week against Arkansas, 8 receptions, 189 yards, and a touchdown. So he's clearly getting the volume, clearly able to make some really, really big plays for Spencer Rattler. I'm not a huge fan of Spencer Rattler. I don't think he's looked particularly good this year so far, but Antwain Wells Jr. seems like a great bailout options for him. And so far this year, Antwain has seen 18 targets for this South Carolina offense. I'm very much interested in Antwain Wells Jr. moving forward if he is available in your league. Nate, what do you think about him?
He's somebody that I thought was making a bad decision by going to South Carolina. I just wasn't sure what to expect from this offense. And then, of course, Corey Rucker also comes over. So I'm interested to see what the receiver room and how the targets work themselves out once Corey Rucker's back. He's supposed to be back in the next week or two. This is one of those moves, kind of like we've talked about before, where I'm a little hesitant to believe kind of what we saw on Saturday. Keep in mind, they also play Georgia next weekend.
Okay, yeah.
So don't expect much. You're not going to be able to start him for a week. It's essentially a bye week when Georgia's on the schedule. But they have Charlotte and South Carolina State coming on after that. So there's opportunity there. If you want to get ahead of your league mates, you might add him now and then just know that you're going to sit him for a week. But he's a talented player. Chris Moxley was hyping him up, saying he was going to be the wide receiver 1 in this room. And sure enough, he definitely is.
I mean, I want to say it's a full buy because last year Josh Vann caught 128 yards and a touchdown against Georgia last year. So yeah. Maybe. I'm not. Okay. That feels like bad advice. Don't do it, y'all. Don't do it.
Yeah. Start him in your leagues if you're playing me, for sure. Go for it.
Exactly. I'm interested still because, like you said, the reports out of camp have been very clear. Wells has been the most impressive receiver for them. I have not really heard the same out of Rucker. Now, granted, right. Rucker has been banged up. He hasn't really been out there. But even still, Rucker to me felt like the even bigger mistake out of those two going to South Carolina. He knew there was already some established options there. Josh Vann, Jalen Brooks has looked really good for South Carolina so far. I think it's going to be harder for Rucker to break his way into the full starting three receivers than we're kind of initially giving credit for here. I'm not worried about him with Wells whatsoever. I think Wells is going to continue to smash, except against Georgia. Don't play anybody against Georgia.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment of the situation there at South Carolina.
All right, last but not least, Keelan Stokes, wide receiver out of Tulsa. He was a big disappointment, I remember, last year. People were drafting him relatively high last year, and then he just went out, couldn't stay healthy. Even in the games he did play, was not very impressive. It looks like we might have been a year too early on him, because so far this year, game 1, 11 receptions, 169 yards, and a touchdown. And then he followed it up with last week, 8 receptions, 135 yards, and a touchdown. 200-yard plus performances for Stokes. You got to love that so far with a Tulsa team that's throwing the ball a lot more right now. So, Nate, is Keelan Stokes somebody that you are shooting for on your waiver wire moving forward?
Yeah, you can't ignore the production that he's had so far. We discussed that Bryn Sanity was coming on, and we talked about that last week, and he followed that up with another nice week in week 2. You know, this is a staff at Tulsa that historically has been a part of some really high-powered offenses at Baylor, at Bowling Green a number of years back when they had it going on. So we've been expecting this kind of offense from them for a while, but this is really the first year that they've put it into play. So I'm really interested to see if they can keep it up. But Stokes is him and Santana there at Tulsa have put up some really big numbers, and I fully expect him to continue to do so. I think he's in for a big year.
No arguments from me there. Honorable mentions for wide receiver. Got 2 for you guys real quick. Nico Remigio out of Fresno State. I was going to put him in our main 5 if he led the team in targets again this week. He did not. Jalen Cropper had a bounce-back week and led the team in targets there. But Remigio, still a very good option for Fresno State moving forward. They clearly like him a lot. They want to throw the ball his way. Probably the safer option between him and Cropper right now, because Cropper, while he had the most targets, didn't really do a lot with them yesterday. And Remigio seems to be the one that is doing a little bit more, so I definitely keep an eye on him. And then the other one here, Jalen McMillan out of Washington. 2 very good performances out of him the last 2 weeks. The problem is I'm not ready to fully invest with him until Washington plays a team that has any kind of pulse on defense. So probably a guy that I'm looking at next week if he plays well against Michigan State. But for now, I'm just going to say keep an eye on him. Any other honorable mentions you kind of want to throw out there, Nate? Just any of the positions? I realize I keep forgetting to ask you.
No. I think we're good. I think some of these guys we've mentioned here have a chance to be really nice, and I don't have anybody to add as far as honorable mentions.
That's good. All right, tight ends, real quick. We'll run through these guys real quick. First one here. This is the one I'm most hesitant about, but it's the one that, I just feel like calling my shot early on this one. Clay Cundiff, tight end out of Wisconsin. Wisconsin, we have seen in the past utilize the tight end very well with Jake Ferguson, and it is a team that does not like to throw the ball downfield a whole ton, but they do like reliable short field pass catchers, And like I said, that is very much in line with having a really good receiving tight end. Clay Cundiff has been somebody I have seen beat writers talk about how this staff is excited to have back after he had a very gruesome ankle injury last year. I fully expect that week over week, he earns a better role kind of moving forward. This past week, he had only 4 receptions for 59 yards and 2 touchdowns. So very touchdown dependent there. But again, just the way this staff has been talking about him, I fully expect them to be just kind of easing him in right now and for him to become a bigger part down the line, as we've seen other tight ends out of Wisconsin do. Nate, do you have any thoughts on Mr. Cundiff here?
He certainly wasn't somebody on my radar a few weeks ago, but he has performed well. I think it's probably safe to think that he's a nice floor type of tight end.
Fair.
So I don't think he's dynamic enough, and that offense is dynamic enough to get you too many big games. But yeah, he's touchdown dependent. But it's fair to think that he could be somebody that gets you, throughout the course of the season, 35 catches, 500 yards, and 6 touchdowns. Something like that.
Yep, fair enough. All right, next one here. This one I'm definitely more solidified on here. Luke Musgrave, tight end out of Oregon. This is a man that has seen 16 targets come his way, and at least for one of the games has led. He might have actually, did he lead his team in receptions last week? I can't remember off the top of my head. Let me look it up real quick. I should have this written down. My apologies, y'all. This past week,
so it's either him or I was gonna say it's probably either him or Slade Bolden or something like that.
It was. No, he led it. He has led his team. He has led the Oregon State Beavers in receptions and receiving yards both weeks that they have played. Week 1, he saw 6 catches for 89 yards and a touchdown. Last week, he had 5 receptions for 80 yards. No touchdown, no end zone for him last week. But regardless, if you're looking for tight ends that are just getting volume and clearly a top option for their passing games, no problem to me going out and grabbing Musgrave out of Oregon State. They play in the Pac-12, not a ton of defenses that you're going to be scared to start him up against. This is one of those guys where if you waited on tight end and you said, I'll take a shot on a guy, but if he doesn't work out, I'll go grab the hot guy off the waiver wire. Here's your hot guy off the waiver wire right here for me in Luke Musgrave. Nate, what do you think about Musgrave right now?
Yeah, I think he's definitely a must-add. He's the top guy there in the receiving game for Oregon State, and they're not afraid to use him. He was actually on Bruce Feldman's freaks list in the preseason that Bruce Feldman puts out. And so, I mean, I think he runs he's like 6'6", 245, but he runs like a 4.5 40. I mean, he's an exceptional athlete. So you add that level of ability, that dynamism that we talked about that maybe Cundiff doesn't have. This guy definitely does have it. And then if you give him the volume, I mean, we could be looking at a pretty good chance of a top 10 tight end here.
Oh, very much so. And I'm going to go ahead and move on to our last tight end here because he's a very similar situation. Another guy that I'm really bought into right now. I debated throwing him on here because I felt like enough people knew about him, but then I kind of thought about it a little bit longer. I'm like, no, he went late enough in drafts that he's probably still available in a lot of leagues. So we'll talk about him. Joe Wilson, tight end out of Central Michigan. Whenever I drafted him this offseason, it was never like I expect this guy to be like my week in, week out starter. I said, this is an upside pick here. And this is one of those upside picks that to me is hitting pretty early on. Currently leads Central Michigan in receptions with 13. Week 1, 6 receptions, 64 yards. No touchdowns against Oklahoma State. But last week against South Alabama, 7 receptions, 73 yards, and a touchdown. This is the kind of guy that, first of all, is consistent in terms of how he's getting his targets, because last week's Golden Child McGoey, a lot of people picked him up. I said, wait on him a little bit, and y'all should have listened because he only had 1 catch for 5 yards. Yeah. Wilson, it looks like it's a more consistent option here. And once they get into MAC play, he really looks like the kind of guy that can absolutely take advantage of some mismatches for the Central Michigan passing game. I heavily look forward to whatever Joe Wilson has for us moving forward here. Nate, what do you think about Joe Wilson?
I'm with you. He should definitely be rostered as well. He was somebody that I was fairly high on coming into the season. We talked about that pass game last week that we think could be improved this year, and maybe not has to rely on getting 40 carries to Lou Nichols every week. But the receivers in that room are mostly, question marks. And as we saw, there could be a little bit of fool's gold there, but Joel Wilson is not fool's gold. He's done this. He's been doing it for a couple of years. He's a very safe tight end that could definitely finish in that tight end 10 to 15 range. Yeah.
And again, when it comes to action, you love getting pieces that not a lot of people are in on. And Joe Wilson absolutely is somebody that you could take advantage of right now by him not being on anybody's roster. All right, quick honorable mentions for tight end. I want to throw out Griffin Herbert, the tight end wide receiver hybrid there at LA Tech. Has scored 12-plus fantasy points in half PPR formats the last 2 weeks. Do I love him as an option? No, but it's even still, if he is truly a wide receiver that just happens to have tight end eligibility and they are using him week in and week out, there could be a little bit of a cheat code there. So keep an eye on him. The other one I want to throw out here, Terrence Ferguson. out of Oregon. Had a really, really good week last week for the Oregon Ducks. I believe he scored 2 touchdowns. But again, a lot of people are he's still off a lot of people's radars because, again, week 1 they played Georgia. But even in that game, he was seeing plenty of targets, and especially down near the red zone. He was one of Bo Nix's top options in the red zone. We saw it again last week against Eastern Washington, right? I believe so.
Yeah, I think it's right.
But we saw it again last week. He could be a guy that is probably a safe touchdown floor every given week, because that's where Bo Nix is looking whenever they get down near the red zone. Thoughts on either of those guys, Nate, real quick?
I think they're decent options. I'm guessing it's Griffin Abear since he's from Louisiana, so I'm going to call him Griffin Abear. I could be totally wrong, but I think that's how people from Louisiana pronounce it. But he's definitely a wide receiver. He's like 6'2", 195. So I don't know. Like, I don't think he's been listed as a tight end on their roster in like 2 years. So it's kind of amazing he's still carrying some of that eligibility. But that's what you kind of look for to get an edge sometimes in your league.
Oh, yeah.
These guys that are playing wide receiver, and he's broken off 2 long touchdown catches in the last 2 weeks. So there's potential there. We'll just have to see what kind of volume he gets. But yeah, he could be a fun option.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe that brings us to the end of our show here. Nate, really appreciate you coming on here this Sunday afternoon to discuss these waiver wire options with us, as well as let the populace know whether or not they should be freaking out over some of their highly invested prospects right now. Just a couple reminders before we go and everything. Make sure you check out the second episode of CTN later this week, where I will be discussing your sit-start discussions with Chris Moxley, as well as previewing some of the higher scoring games for this upcoming week. Be on the lookout for my tweet. If you're listening to this on Monday, probably going to see it sometime in the morning on Monday. Look for my tweet. I will ask you guys for your sit-start questions, dilemmas. Try to keep it to 2 players for 1 spot on your lineup. If you have to fit in 3 because you really think it's just that difficult to separate between the 3, I can handle that as well. Please don't go and give me your entire running back room and then be like, hey, start 2 of these guys and let me know if a third one should be my flex. We don't have time for that, y'all. I would love to. You can DM me if you want to ask me that question. But for the show, we're going to try to keep it to relatively straightforward, this guy or that guy to start kind of questions. Before we get out of here, Nate, anything you want to remind the audience before we head out of here?
No, man. I think we covered it all. Just it was a great show, and man, crazy weekend, and I am really looking forward to week 3 again.
Yeah, I'm ready for week 3 completely on, dude. Like the off season's fun, but I really forget how much fun it is once we actually just get into it and we're having to analyze every game. God, I love it so much. And real quick, one more thing before we get out of here. I just want to throw out there again, if you want any questions or anything, just reach out to me. I'm at CFF_Jared. Nate is at CFF Nate. Always willing to help you guys out with your questions whenever we can. It's a very busy week, just very busy season right now. So if we don't get back to you immediately, just hit us up again and be like, hey, just a bump in case you haven't gotten back to it, because there's a lot. I get a lot of messages. I get a lot of ads every day. It's not that I don't like you. It's just that usually I'm doing something else at the moment, and then I'll get back to you later. Even so, awesome show, Nate. Really appreciate you guys all tuning in, and we'll see you guys on this Wednesday. Appreciate it. Have a wonderful and blessed day.